Sister Josephine awoke to the biting silence of a December morning, her breath blooming in the frigid air of the dormitory. Outside, the high country winter had settled in with a vengeance, the wind howling across the plains and piling snow against the rough-hewn timber of the mission. 23 children slept in the rows of cots around her, small mounds under thin wool blankets. They were the children of the rails and the mines, Chinese orphans left behind when the work moved on or the earth claimed their fathers. Sister Josephine pulled her shawl tight, dread settling in her stomach. Today was Christmas Eve, and the larder was nearly bare. She had prayed for a miracle until her knees bruised the floorboards. None had come. Rising silently, she descended the narrow stairs to the kitchen. It held only the stark markers of poverty, a half sack of flour, some lard, and potatoes that had seen better days. It was not the makings of a celebration, it was the geography of shame. How did one explain to children, already discarded by a harsh world, that even God's provision had limits? She lit the lantern and opened the back door, intending to chip ice from the water barrel. The wagon stood there like an apparition in the swirling snow. Sister Josephine froze, the lantern light swaying, certain the altitude and hunger were deceiving her. But the biting wind carried the scent of cured meat and sweet apples. Frost glittered on burlap sacks, dusting the wagon bed like diamond dust. Her hand trembled as she stepped off the porch, her boots crunching into the fresh drift. It was real. There were 50-pound sacks of white rice, a luxury they hadn't seen in months. There were dressed geese, cold and heavy. Crates of root vegetables, jars of honey that caught the lantern light like liquid amber, apples wrapped individually in newspaper, and a small sack of hard candies. There was no note, no signature, just sudden, overwhelming abundance where desperation had stood only moments before. Sister Josephine gripped the side of the wagon, the rough wood grounding her. Tears came hot and fast, freezing on her cheeks. Someone had seen them. In a territory that often looked at her charges with suspicion or disdain, someone had looked with mercy. "Sister!" She turned to find little Lynn standing in the doorway, her nightgown fluttering in the draft. Soon others appeared, drawn by the cold air and the strange energy. 23 pairs of dark eyes went wide with wonder. "Who brought it?" asked Chen, the oldest boy at 12, his voice cracking with sleep. "An angel," Lynn whispered. Sister Josephine wiped her face and examined the wagon. It was of fine construction, with iron-banded wheels and specific joinery she recognized from the heavy transport used by the wealthy cattle barons. The tracks in the snow led northeast, toward the jagged peaks where the massive ranches dominated the valleys. "Angels sometimes wear boots and drive wagons," she said softly, helping Lynn down the steps. "And I intend to find this one." The children gathered around the provisions, touching the sacks of rice reverently. Sister Josephine let them marvel while her mind worked. Someone in this valley possessed enough wealth to give this generously, and enough sorrow to do it in the dead of night. She would find them. She would offer proper thanks. And perhaps, if Providence allowed, she might heal whatever wound made a soul hide such kindness in the dark. After a modest but joyful Christmas dinner, the laughter of the children still echoing in the drafty hall, Sister Josephine borrowed the mission's mule and small cart. She drove to the settlement of Granite Creek. The list of provisions sat folded in her pocket, every item memorized. Abernathy's general store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and wood smoke. Mr. Abernathy looked up from his ledger as the bell chimed, surprise registering on his face. "Sister Josephine. The roads are treacherous. I didn't expect to see you." "I need information, Mr. Abernathy, not supplies." She approached the counter and smoothed out her list. "Someone purchased these items recently. 50 pounds of rice, dressed geese, preserves, peppermint candies. I need to know who." Abernathy's face shifted. Recognition was followed quickly by discomfort. He glanced toward the frosted window. "That is a mighty specific order. It went out to the Mission of the Sacred Heart yesterday. No name attached. I cannot accept such charity without offering gratitude," she said, her voice gentle but unyielding. The storekeeper sighed, removing his spectacles. "That would be Blackwood's order. Thomas Blackwood." But sister, he doesn't welcome visitors. The rancher, she knew the name, everyone did. He owned the largest spread in 3 territories. He has been a widower for 4 years now, since Sarah passed. His heart died with her. Abernathy lowered his voice, though the store was empty. He keeps to himself up at the Shadow Ridge Ranch. Sees nobody. Says less. Best let sleeping dogs lie. Sister Josephine studied the man's weathered face. She heard what he didn't say. That Thomas Blackwood's isolation ran deeper than preference. That his loneliness had calcified into something harder than the mountain granite. Mr. Abernathy, she said, pulling her gloves back on. A man who fills a wagon with food for hungry orphans isn't sleeping. He is just lost in the dark. She left before he could argue. The ride to Shadow Ridge gave her time to think. Wealth and isolation made strange companions. Most rich men she had known flaunted their charity to wash away their sins. Thomas Blackwood hid his kindness like contraband. What kind of pain made a man afraid of gratitude? By the time she arrived, her resolve was solid. The Blackwood Ranch house rose from the snow-covered prairie like a monument to emptiness. It was 2 stories of white-painted wood with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back cold. She had seen churches smaller than this home built for 1 man. She tied the mule to the rail and climbed the steps. Her knock echoed inside like a gavel strike. The door opened. Thomas Blackwood filled the frame. He was tall, weathered, perhaps 50 years old, with grey streaking his dark beard. His eyes held the startled look of a man interrupted from a solitude so complete he had forgotten other humans existed. Mr. Blackwood. Sister. I've come to thank you, she said simply. For the provisions. The children had a Christmas because of your generosity. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. You are mistaken. Mr. Abernathy confirmed the order. Your kindness saved us. Mr. Blackwood, please accept our gratitude. He looked past her, toward the horizon, anywhere but at her face. If someone helped, they did it for their own reasons. No thanks necessary. Nevertheless, she held his gaze when he finally met it. The children would be honored if you would share a meal with us. Not as payment. As family. Something flickered in his expression, hope, maybe, or a hunger quickly suppressed by habit. His hand tightened on the door frame. I appreciate the thought, sister. But I am not fit company for children. Especially not yours. Our children are children, Mr. Blackwood. They know kindness when they feel it. We'll save you a place regardless, she added. Please don't. The words came sharp, then softer. It is kinder not to. She nodded, reading the wreckage beneath his refusal. The door remains open. Should you change your mind? He closed the door before she finished speaking. Sister Josephine returned to her cart, but she glanced back once. Through the window, she saw him standing motionless in that empty hallway. A man trapped in a house built for joy, but filled with ghosts. Thomas watched her cart disappear into the white expanse. When the dust settled, the silence returned, thicker now, weighted with her invitation. He walked to the dining room. The table stretched before him, mahogany gleaming in the silence. 10 chairs for a family that never came. Sarah had picked each one, imagining a noisy brood filling the room. He touched the chair where she had Saturday. I don't know how to be around people anymore, he whispered. The house offered no answer. It never did. He had filled it with fine things and emptied it of everything that mattered. The faces of the Chinese orphans haunted him, the glimpses he'd caught through their window when he had driven past to ensure the wagon arrived safely. Children eating at a crowded table, grateful for simple food. Everything his wealth couldn't buy. Sister Josephine's eyes had seen too much. She looked at him not with pity, but with recognition, as if his loneliness were a language she spoke fluently. He poured a whiskey he wouldn't drink and sat in Sarah's chair, watching the sun set through windows that framed his isolation perfectly. Winter deepened. January descended in ice and silence. Thomas threw himself into ranch work with desperate energy. He rode fence lines until Gus, his foreman, commented on sections checked 3 times in a week. He inventoried cattle already counted. He fixed things that weren't broken. Anything to avoid the house and its echoes. But Sarah's voice found him anyway, rising from memory like smoke. "You are building a fortress, Thomas, when what you need is a home." She had said it 2 years before the fever took her. Gus caught him staring at nothing one afternoon in the barn. "You thinking about heading to town, boss?" "No. Might do you good. See some folks." "I see you every day," Thomas grunted. Gus snorted, spitting tobacco into the straw. "I'm paid to tolerate you." "That ain't the same as company." Thomas turned back to the harness he had been oiling. "I'm fine." "Sure you are. That's why you've been sleeping in the tack room half the week." He had no answer for that. The house felt too large, too quiet. Even the barn's hay-scented darkness seemed more honest than those empty rooms. That night, he rode toward the mission without planning to. The excuse formed as he went, checking the road conditions, ensuring the path stayed clear. But when the mission of the Sacred Heart appeared on the ridge, lamplight glowing warm against the blue snow, he knew he had lied to himself. He stopped his horse in the tree line and watched through the window. It was late January, nearing the Lunar New Year, a tradition the sister allowed the children to honor. They were making paper lanterns from scraps of red paper. Sister Josephine was reading to the younger ones, her hands animated. A boy Chen's age was carving something at the table, tongue between his teeth in concentration. Laughter drifted out, muffled by glass and distance, but unmistakable. Thomas's chest constricted. This was what Sarah had wanted. This chaos, this noise, this messy abundance of life spilling over itself. He watched until his fingers numbed from cold. Then he turned for home. But something had shifted. The sight of those children, their easy belonging, their unself-conscious happiness despite having nothing, had planted a thorn in his heart that wouldn't dislodge. Back in his workshop, he lit the lantern and stood before his workbench. Wood scraps lay sorted by type. His tools hung in precise rows. Everything ordered, controlled, lifeless. His hands moved without conscious decision. He selected a piece of pine, tested its grain, and reached for his carving knife. The shape took form slowly. Not just a horse, but an ox, sturdy, strong, head bowed against the wind. Then a dragon, stylized and winding, inspired by a drawing he'd once seen on a crate of tea. He carved through the night. And when dawn broke, a menagerie stood on his bench. Horses, cattle, a crane with spread wings, a wooden doll with jointed arms. He stared at them, suddenly afraid. These weren't gifts. They were confessions carved in wood. Proof that some part of him still remembered how to imagine a child's joy. Gus found him there at sunrise, asleep with his head on the workbench, surrounded by toys. The foreman picked up the dragon, turning it in the light. "These for the orphanage." Thomas's answer came rough with sleep and truth. "I don't know what they're for." But he did, and that terrified him more than the loneliness ever had. He waited until the next heavy snowfall to deliver them. He felt ridiculous, a grown man sneaking around like a thief. But the thought of handing them over directly, of seeing the children's faces, of Sister Josephine's knowing eyes, it was impossible. He drove to the mission after dark. The wagon made too much noise, so he walked the last quarter mile, boots crunching in the snow, carrying a sack of toys and a cord of split firewood. He left the items on the porch. He should leave. He knew he should leave. Instead, he moved to the window. The children were gathered around an old piano. Sister Josephine played, half the keys sticking, but they sang anyway. Lynn's voice rose clear and sweet. Chen helped a younger boy find his place in the songbook. Everyone belonged. Everyone fit. Thomas pressed his palm against the cold glass, separated by inches and miles. Sister Josephine's eyes lifted for a heartbeat. He thought she saw him, but she looked through the window at the darkness beyond, and her expression softened into something like prayer. He stumbled back, heart racing. Get out. Go home. Stop this. But his feet wouldn't move until the last song faded and the lamps began to dim. The next morning, Sister Josephine found the gifts. She sat on the porch step, examining each carved animal with careful hands. The detail astonished her. Every animal had a different stance. The dragon had individual scales. These weren't just carved, they were loved into existence. The children erupted in joy when she brought them inside. Chen claimed the dragon, running his thumb over the spine. Lin cradled the doll like it was made of glass and gold. Who made them? Lin asked. Someone who needed to give as much as you needed to receive, Sister Josephine said. She walked to the window and looked toward the tree line where she had sensed a presence the night before. No one was visible now, but footprints marked the snow, a man's boots, standing and watching for a long time. Thomas Blackwood was circling closer. Like a wolf drawn to firelight, terrified of the warmth but unable to resist it. She prayed he would find courage before fear consumed him completely. Spring arrived with false promises of warmth. Snow melted into mud that sucked at wagon wheels and turned roads into rivers. Thomas avoided town, but his fence wire ran out, and Gus refused to make the trip. You got legs, you go, Gus had said. So Thomas rode to Granite Creek, arriving early to avoid crowds. He failed. Sister Josephine stood outside the mercantile, speaking with the Reverend. She saw him immediately, her face lighting with a surprised pleasure that made him want to spur his horse and run. Mr. Blackwood, she crossed the muddy street, the hem of her habit already soiled. Sister, he tipped his hat, keeping his hand on the reins. The children still play with those beautiful toys. Chen is quite convinced he will be a ranch hand now. He has named all the wooden horses. Thomas's throat tightened. Good. We missed you at the New Year feast. I sent regrets. You sent silence. Her smile didn't fade, but it grew wistful. But we saved you a place regardless. An awkward pause stretched between them. Thomas searched for an escape. Found none. Sister Josephine's expression shifted, growing gentle but serious. One of the boys asked me something last week. Little Wei. He is 6. Curious as a cat. He wanted to know why the generous man didn't think they were good enough to eat with. The words hit like a fist to the sternum. He asked it so earnestly, she continued, watching his face. He wondered if it was because they were Chinese. If you were worried they would embarrass you. Thomas couldn't breathe. The street tilted. I assured him that was not the case, Sister Josephine said softly. But children take things to heart, Mr. Blackwood. They interpret our actions through their own understanding. I never meant. His voice broke. He coughed, tried again. That wasn't my intention. I know. But intention and impact don't always align. She touched his horse's neck, kind even in confrontation. The door remains open. Should you find your courage? He managed a nod, touched his hat brim, and rode away with something dying in his chest. Back at the ranch, he went straight to the barn. Gus took one look at his face and made himself scarce. Thomas leaned against a stall, breathing hard. A 6-year-old boy thought he wasn't good enough. Thought Thomas Blackwood, with his big house and bigger bank account, looked down on orphans because of where they came from. The truth was so much worse. He didn't think himself good enough for them. But the boy didn't know that. Couldn't know that. He only knew that kindness came in the dark and never stayed for daylight. Thomas pressed his forehead against the rough wood. His hands shook. I'm sorry, he whispered to the absent children. I'm so goddamn sorry. But sorry changed nothing. The damage was done. And he had done it by trying to protect himself from exactly this kind of pain. That night, alone in the big house, he couldn't run far enough to escape the image of a 6-year-old boy wondering why he wasn't good enough. The toys he had carved sat on a shelf in his memory. They had become accusations. He poured whiskey he still wouldn't drink and sat in the dark. October returned like a sentence. Another year circling back to Christmas, to anniversaries of loss and reminders of failure. Thomas set the dining room table for one, a ritual of self-punishment he couldn't seem to break. Fine china Sarah had picked. Crystal glasses catching lamplight. Silverware aligned with geometric precision. One plate. One fork. One man eating alone in a house built for dozens. His hand started shaking as he arranged the napkin. Then his shoulders. Then everything collapsed. He gripped the table's edge and wept. He wept for Sarah, dead for years but still haunting every room. For the babies buried on the hill. For himself, trapped in wealth that bought everything except what mattered. For children who thought themselves unworthy when the unworthiness was all his. When he could breathe again, he stumbled to the bedroom and pulled Sarah's journal from the drawer where he had hidden it. Her handwriting was elegant, certain. He opened to the last entry, dated 2 weeks before she died. Thomas has so much love trapped inside him. I see it in how he builds, how he works, how he avoids the town because other people's happiness reminds him of his own lack. He thinks he is protecting himself, but he is just starving in a full larder. I pray someone shows him that love trapped inside turns to poison. Love given away, even imperfectly, becomes medicine. I won't be here to teach him that. But maybe, in time, he will learn it himself. The page blurred. He read it again. Then again. Love trapped inside turns to poison. He looked around the bedroom. Sarah's things were still arranged as if she had just stepped out. Her hairbrush on the dresser. Her shawl on the chair. He had made a shrine when he should have made a life. The answer crystallized with brutal clarity. Courage wasn't about deserving. It was about showing up despite unworthiness. Because everyone was unworthy, and everyone needed connection anyway. Thomas stood, wiped his eyes, and walked to the barn. The wagon sat waiting, as if it had always known this moment would come. "All right, Sarah," he said to the darkness. "All right." He began loading supplies for Christmas. But this time, he would deliver them himself. This time, he would stay. Christmas morning broke cold and clear, the sky a piercing blue over the white mountains. Thomas drove the loaded wagon toward the mission with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Every instinct screamed to turn back. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The mission appeared over the rise. Smoke curled from the chimney. Lamplight glowed in the windows despite the early hour. Thomas stopped the wagon in front and sat frozen, unable to make his body move. This was a mistake. He should leave the supplies and go. That's what he had always done. Why change now? Because a 6-year-old boy thinks you believe he's not good enough. Thomas climbed down before courage could desert him completely. His knock echoed loud in the quiet morning. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Sister Josephine stood there in her habit. No surprise on her face, only welcome, warm and certain. "Mr. Blackwood. We've been expecting you." I brought. His voice failed. He gestured helplessly at the wagon. "I see. Come in, please. The children are just waking." She stepped aside. Thomas crossed the threshold into warmth and the smell of tea and pine. His heart felt like it might explode. Children began appearing, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Curious and cautious. Lynn saw him first. Her face lit up, then shadowed with uncertainty. "You came," Chen said, older and more guarded. "I did." Thomas cleared his throat. "I brought Christmas dinner. Thought maybe I could help unload it." "We would be grateful for the help," Sister Josephine said. "Children, come greet Mr. Blackwood properly." They surrounded him shyly. He didn't know where to look, what to do with his hands. He had faced down stampedes with less terror. Together, they unloaded the wagon. The children chattered, asking questions in a mix of English and Cantonese. He answered in halting fragments. His panic began to ebb as their ease became contagious. When the last sack was carried inside, Thomas turned toward his wagon. Time to go. He had done what he came for. Mr. Blackwood. He turned. A small boy stood behind him. Way. Sister Josephine had named him, but Thomas saw now this was the child who had asked the question. He couldn't have been more than 6. Will you stay this time? The question hung in the cold air. Every excuse Thomas had practiced dissolved. He looked at the boy's serious face, at Sister Josephine watching from the doorway, at the children gathered in the warmth behind her. His knees hit the frozen ground. He knelt to the boy's level, and his eyes burned with tears he couldn't hide. Yes, he whispered, voice breaking. If you will have me. Way's face transformed. He threw his arms around Thomas's neck. Thomas caught him automatically, this small stranger trusting him without reason. Sister Josephine's hand settled on his shoulder. Come inside, Thomas. Come home. He stood, the child still in his arms, and let himself be led across the threshold he had been too afraid to cross for years. The door closed behind him. The cold stayed outside. Inside, there was warmth. There were children. There was noise and chaos and the possibility of belonging. For the first time in 4 years, Thomas Blackwood stopped running. Dinner unfolded in waves of overwhelming sensation. Thomas sat at the crowded table, hemmed in by children on both sides, drowning in conversation he couldn't follow and laughter that disoriented him with its easy joy. Lynn sat to his left, explaining the proper way to fold a paper crane. Chen sat to his right, describing his plans to become a cattleman in exhaustive detail. Across the table, Sister Josephine caught his eye and smiled, not with pity, but with understanding. Mr. Blackwood? Way asked from down the table. Do you got cows? I do. About 2,000 head. The boy's eyes widened. That's a lot of cows. It is. Do they got names? No. Too many to name. I'd name them all, Way announced with absolute certainty. The other children laughed, and Thomas found himself smiling, rusty, uncertain, but genuine. Sister Josephine rose to carve the goose. Thomas stood automatically. Let me. She handed him the knife. And he carved with steady hands while children chattered around him. This was Sarah's dream made real. A full table. Hungry mouths to feed. Noise and mess and abundant life. The ache in his chest wasn't pain anymore. It was something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. After dinner, the children showed him their dormitory. Lynn pointed out the doll he had carved, now named Sarah after he had mentioned his wife's name. Chen's wooden animal stood in careful formation on his bedside table. I carved them, Thomas said quietly. We know, Chen said. Sister Josephine told us after a while. Said you were shy. Shy. As if fear and grief were just bashfulness. Thank you, Lynn said, hugging the doll. She's my favorite thing. Thomas had to look away. He had given so little, really. Wood and time. But to them, it meant everything. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Thomas came every Sunday. He taught the older boys how to mend fences and rope. He taught the girls how to track animals in the snow. Sister Josephine observed his slow thawing, how he learned names and remembered preferences, how his laughter came easier each visit. By spring, Chen and another older boy were working at his ranch on weekends under Gus's supervision. Thomas found himself keeping the bunkhouse ready, the table set for company. The big house no longer echoed quite so emptily. One Sunday in April, Sister Josephine walked with him to his wagon as he prepared to leave. You've given them so much, she said. Hope, purpose, a future beyond these walls. They've given me more. His voice held conviction now, not hesitation. They gave me a reason to come home. And have you? Come home. Thomas looked back at the mission, where children waved from windows. Then at his ranch in the distance, where doors stood open and life had begun to return. "I'm learning," he said. "It's hard, remembering how to live instead of just existing. The best things usually are." He climbed into the wagon, then paused. "Sister. Thank you. For not giving up. I never give up on people who are already trying, Thomas. I just wait for them to see what I see." "And what's that?" "Someone worth knowing. Someone worth staying." Christmas came again, completing the cycle. This time, Thomas arrived early, rolled up his sleeves, and helped cook. The children swarmed around him like he had always belonged. Chen showed off his roping skills, learned at the ranch. Lynn read aloud from a book Thomas had brought her. At dinner, Thomas sat at the head of the table, not because he demanded it, but because Sister Josephine insisted, and the children agreed. They held hands for grace. And when Sister Josephine thanked God for bringing the lost home to family, Thomas's throat closed with emotion. After the children went to bed, he and Sister Josephine sat on the porch in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall on the distant mountains. "I spent 30 years building an empire," Thomas said quietly. "Land and cattle and a house big enough for a small town. Thought that's what success looked like. Now I know better." He looked at the mission, warm light spilling from its windows. It took a wagon of food and the courage to stay for supper to finally build a life. Sister Josephine smiled. Sarah would be proud. I think she'd say it's about time. They sat together as the stars emerged. Two people who had learned that family wasn't born, it was built. One meal, one moment, one choice to stay instead of run. Inside, children slept safe and warm. Outside, a man who had lost everything discovered he still had the capacity to love. The door to Shadow Ridge Ranch stood open now. The children visited on weekends, learning skills and finding futures. The big house echoed less. The table filled more often. Thomas Blackwood had spent his wealth on land and cattle, but he had spent his heart on 23 children who taught him that belonging wasn't about deserving. It was about showing up. It was about staying. It was about coming home.